Okay, so let's jump into our next video where we are going to add a new movement script that is going to emulate some mechanics. For example, we're only going to be able to move on the x-axis, and we are going to be able to jump as well. So before we get started, I do want to kind of give you guys just some perspective on the process of game design, and that is that it is through and through an iterative process, meaning that it is trial and error. So when you encounter an issue, so for example, like today, for instance, we're going to be creating a new script that's more involved than what you've done before, and you very well may encounter an error. Now, Unity is going to do the best that it can to tell you what that error is down here whenever you try to compile your script and something goes wrong. What's important for you guys to understand is that part of this job, part of the process of game development, programming in general, is figuring out and debugging your own code. So before you come and ask me or Ms. Kiselwitz a question about your code, something doesn't work, make an attempt to solve it yourself first. Read the error message, maybe type in what's going on in Google to see if it can help you. The sooner you learn how to self-correct your own code, research and debug whatever is going on, the better programmer you're going to be, the better game designer you're going to be. Outside of high school, there really is no hand-holding whatsoever. It is up to you to figure out how to solve these problems. When I went to college for game design, there were no tutorial videos like this. It was literally, you are going to make a game and you figure out how to do it. So keep that in mind as we are doing this. Really put an effort forward to fix your code when you run into an issue. And then once you've made an attempt, come to Ms. Kiselwitz or I, and we will be able to help you debug that code. Okay, so let's get started. So the very first thing that I'm going to do for our new script, I'm going to keep our movement script here that we have because, you never know, maybe we want to reference back to this or use it for something else. So I'm just going to right click on our assets and I'm going to create another C# script. And I'm going to call this, let's just call it platform. What do I want to call it? Platformer movement. Let's just call it platformer movement. There we go. Perfect. All right, so it's creating that script, and I'm going to double click it so it opens up in VS Code. And so you notice that every single time you open up a new script, you're going to get this same exact thing. So to start things off, we're going to create some public and private variables similar to what we did in the first script. So this will be a good way for you to kind of get some more practice doing this. All right, so the first thing that we're going to create is our movement speed variable, just like we did in the previous script. So I'm going to use the public tag so we can access this in the Unity editor. So public float, I'm going to call this move speed. And I'll set this equal to, just for now, I'm going to say 5f. We're going to make another public variable. This is going to be another float, and this is going to be our jump force variable because we want to be able to customize and fluctuate how quickly our player can accelerate off the ground when they jump. So for right now, I'm going to set this to 10f, and we may need to change that later. We'll see once we do some playtesting. So the next thing that we need to determine is if the player is touching anything. So for example, if the player is touching something that we would consider to be the ground, we want to keep track of the fact that the player is in fact not jumping. And that when they are jumping, we want to keep track of that as well. So we need to use a Boolean in order to do that. So think in terms of whenever you need to keep track of something that's like a yes or no question, is the character jumping, yes or no? That is a Boolean. So for this one, it's going to be a private variable because we don't need to publicly access this in any way. We're going to use Boolean, I'm going to call it is jumping, and we're going to set this equal to false, because by default the player is not going to be jumping. Only when the player hits the space bar are they going to be jumping. And of course we need to be able to access our rigid body. So just like the previous movement script, we are going to create a private variable called rigid body 2D, or a private variable that is referencing the rigid body 2D, and we're going to give it the name of RB for rigid body, I should say. Sorry about that. Okay. So in our start function, we are going to assign a value to our rigid body variable. This is also called initializing. We're going to initialize it to getComponent. And the component that we are going to get is our rigid body 2D. So what this is doing is it is assigning our RB variable to the component that is attached to this game object, the rigid body 2D component that is attached to this game object, so that we can reference that specific rigid body that is attached to our game object. So now let's go on down to void update. Here is where we are going to actually add our code for the horizontal movement and for our jumping. So very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create the code for our horizontal movement. So one thing I want you guys to get in the habit of is commenting your code as much as possible so you can keep track of what's going on. So here to start off in void update, I'm going to say that this is code for horizontal movement. And let's go ahead and jump right in. So I'm going to create a float for this. I'm going to call it horizontal input. And this is the exact same code as what was used in the previous movement script video. So we're getting the input dot. So sometimes if you have I think it's called the .NET SDK or something like that, that references like a lot of Unity scripts or things like that. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but what you may find is that sometimes you will put in a command using dot notation where you follow things up with a period, and it will fill in something that you might not be looking for. So like here it automatically put in horizontal input. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm going to hit Control Z to get back to what I had before, and I'm going to say input get axis, and we are getting the horizontal axis. So remember, this is referencing, if we go back into Unity here, going to edit project settings, and we go into input manager, this is referencing our horizontal movement here. So this is our left and right, or A and D buttons, for example. And while we're here, we might as well go on down to jump, and we can see that this is the input manager for our jumping, and this is going to by default be set to something different for the positive button. I want you guys to go ahead and change that to space, because we want to jump when the space bar is pressed. So I'm just going to go ahead and X out of that and move on back over to our code. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a vector2 variable to store our movement data for the game object. So to do that, I'm going to say vector2 to tell our C# script that this is a vector2 variable, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it move vector, and this is going to be a new vector2. and we want our horizontal input, and we want to multiply that by whatever our move speed is. And we also want to keep track of our velocity in the y direction because we are going to be jumping, so we want to keep track of that as well. So really quickly, the star symbol is the multiplication, and just for clarity's sake, / like that is divide, and obviously plus is the plus key, minus is minus, just to be perfectly clear. So we're taking the horizontal input and multiplying it by our movement speed, and we also want to know what our y-axis velocity is for our rigid body. So I'm going to reference our rigid body variable, RB, but the data that I'm concerned with is our velocity on the y-axis. So there's a lot happening here that might be new to you, most likely is new to you. But the gist of it is that what you need to understand here is we're making a new vector2 variable that is keeping track of our movement speed in the horizontal axis as well as our velocity on the y-axis. Okay, we're going to keep it just as simple as possible, and you're going to see where this y-axis velocity is going to come into play in just a minute. All right. Okay, so now we need to find out if our player is jumping. So I'm going to add another comment here, and we are going to say player is jumping. And we're going to determine this with a conditional statement. So I'm going to say if input dot get button down. So we are looking for a down key press on a specific button, and the button that I'm concerned with is whatever we have assigned our jump button. And as we previously mentioned here, if we go back again to edit, project settings, input manager, go down to jump, for the jump button, we have the space key assigned to it. So if our input is get button down for our jump key, and we're going to do something new here, I'm going to use a logical operator called AND. It's 2 ampersands. So I'm saying if our input is the jump key and here's something else new too, an exclamation mark, is jumping, then I want to do the following code. So let's break this down really quick. So we have our conditional statement that is checking to see if something is happening. If our jump button is being pressed, that's what this is checking for. This is the ampersand, or the AND logical operator, which means if this is true and this is true, then run this code. So I'm saying if this statement to the left is true and this statement to the right is true, we are going to run some code. So this exclamation mark means not. So I am saying if is jumping is not true. Because if in a conditional statement, if I just simply take a Boolean value and I say is jumping, I say if is jumping, that is automatically checking to see if this variable is equal to true. If I put an exclamation mark in front of that, I am checking to see if it is not true. So if we are not jumping and the user has pressed down the jump key, we are going to allow the user to jump. So I'm going to reference our move vector variable, specifically in the y-axis, and I'm going to apply our jump force to that. So if this happens, that means the user is actively jumping, and I want to change the value to is jumping to be equal to true so that we can keep track of when and when not the user is jumping. So if this conditional statement is true, that means the user is in fact able to jump, and we will allow them to jump. So I want our Boolean to be updated to true. All right. So now after this, we need to update the velocity for our rigid body variable. So I'm going to reference our RB variable for rigid body, point to its velocity, and I'm going to set it equal to our vector2 variable, move vector. Okay, so this is what is going to update the rigid body game object, or the rigid body assigned to our game object. Perfect. Okay, so for this next part, we're going to do something a little bit different. We are going to check to see if the user is touching the ground, so we can determine if they are jumping or not. So in order to do that, we are going to write a new method, but this is a pre-built method inside of Unity. And what happens is this pre-built function is, or method, I'm sorry, is called whenever it detects that two objects that have colliders on them touch each other. So whenever our square character is touching the collider of our, what we are going to define as the ground, it is going to call this method and run the code inside of it. Okay? So let's go ahead and write this out. To create this pre-built method, we're going to start with the private keyword, and we're going to use the void keyword because remember in our first video this actually isn't returning any values. So whenever a method doesn't return any values, it has the void keyword. So now we're going to use the name of the pre-built method, and it is on collision 2D. And the parameters that this method is expecting is collision 2D collision. So all you really need to understand for now about this specifically is that this is the name of the pre-built method in Unity, and these parameters contain all of the collision data that it needs in order to detect if the two colliders are touching each other. We won't go into any more detail than that. That is all you really need to understand at the moment. So inside of this method, we are going to write a conditional, and we're going to say if collision dot game object. Okay, so we're whoops, I forgot the capital O. So we're pointing to the game object that is associated with this script. Compare tag. We're going to go over what tags are in a second. And I'm specifically looking for the tag defined as ground. So we are going to define colliders as being the ground. So if there is a collision between our game object and the collider with the name of ground, we are going to change our isJumping variable to false, because that means the user is in fact touching the ground. So they are therefore not jumping. All right, so this is our new movement script. Contains everything we need: horizontal movement and our ability to jump. So hopefully I don't have any errors in here. Let's go ahead and find out. So I'm going to go back into Unity. So I do in fact have an error. So this is great. So I can show you how to go in and try to identify where you are having issues. So here in the error, I can see it's in my platformer movement script, and it's on line 15. The type or namespace name rigid body 2D cannot be found. Okay, so all right. I know exactly what this is, but let's assume I don't, right? So let's go in and check what is going on. So I can see here in line 15, that is where my issue is. And in fact, I have accidentally capitalized the B in rigid body instead of lowercasing it. Notice here in our private rigid body variable RB, it is using the rigid body keyword, and in Unity the B is not capitalized. So that is what I change, and let me go ahead and save that. And that should hopefully be the only error that I have. Let's find out. And it looks like that is the case. So now we can go to our, what's it called? Our red, square character here. And I'm going to take our new platformer script and add it right here to the bottom. We have our public variables, move speed and jump force, perfect. So let's go ahead and click play. Now notice I can move, but I was only able to jump one time. That is because we have not defined any of our little floor or wall here as being the ground. So our script ran and I jumped, and then after jumping it just kept my Boolean value of is jumping to true. So now it always thinks I'm jumping. So let's go in and fix this. So to add tags to colliders, or to game objects I should say in general, you're going to go up here in the inspector to the top. So we have the name of the object here, and under it we can assign tags to it. So you can see that there's some pre-assigned or pre-built tags inside of Unity, but we want to create our own. I'm going to go down here to add tag. The list is empty. I'm going to click this plus symbol down here, and I'm going to create a new tag called ground and click save. Now we can go back into the inspector for that specific object, go to the tag, and assign our new ground tag. And I'm going to do the same exact thing here for this part as well. Ground. Perfect. So let's click play again. And let's give this a shot. Alright, so I can move. And I could jump, but I could only jump once, so that's not good. Let's go ahead and fix that. Why is that happening? Oh, I miscalled the function here. I put on collision 2D. This actually needs to be on collision enter 2D. That is my bad. On collision enter 2D. So let's let that recompile. Perfect. Now we should be good to go. Yep, now we are good. We can see I can jump. And I can't really jump high enough to reach the top there, so let's go ahead and fix that. So in order to do that, we are going to change our some of our public variables. I'm going to change the jump force. I'm going to go ahead and double this to 20. And feel free to have fun with this, experiment with it, make your character jump like crazy, crazy high. One of the really fun things of game design is just being able to like mess with these values and just do some really crazy stuff. So mess with the movement speed, mess with the jump force, have fun with it. And is this enough to jump? Yep, we can clear our obstacle there, and we are good. So you have successfully now added a jumping mechanic to our 2D platformer. So our happy little red square character can jump over obstacles. All right. So that's going to be it for this video, and we will see you in the next one.